Hey, welcome. Come on in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to your questions for the interview. The most obvious way that the MEM program has evolved is it's grown, right? We're a lot larger than we were when we started or even when I joined Duke. But there's much more important way that we've changed, and that is with growth comes a lot of opportunity. And what I mean by that is the more students that come, then the more we can offer in terms of classes, in terms of co-curricular activities, in terms of all the things that students want to do. So that, I think, has allowed us to be very selective in the kinds of programs that we offer and to expand our offerings. That's good for students. Now, we don't want to get too big. I think we're at a really good size right now. It gives us the best balance between being large enough to offer a lot of cool programs and being small enough to have a good experience for the students. Other ways that we've evolved or changed is we're much more integrated into Duke University as a whole. When Dr. Fox and I first came here, we were more of an isolated program where we didn't interact with the rest of the university a lot. And I don't think there was any specific reason for that. It was really just the fact that it had evolved from a small program and was still relatively small, so people on campus didn't really know about it. And probably the third way that we've evolved is that we've become much more integrated with our industrial advisory board, and that means our industry colleagues and contingents or stakeholders, we call them, who are many times graduates of Duke from many years ago but are now in senior positions in industry. They're much more interacting much more closely with the program, and I think that allows us to have a real perspective on what industry wants with the MEM program and how we can provide the types of graduates that industry needs. I think those are the main ways we've evolved. Probably one other way would be the MEMPC, the Programs Consortium, the Master of Engineering Management Programs Consortium, with all the top schools in the country who offer these degrees, Stanford, MIT, Dartmouth, etc. We've become very integrated with that group. We were some of the first folks to join that group, and I think we've become very good at sharing best practices. So we understand what the different groups do, and we try to learn from each other, and that gives a lot of credibility to the degree, which now is much more well known than it was, although we still have a long way to go. But it's a much better known degree because of partly that group's efforts and the fact that all the top universities that we work with in that group are very well known and have MEM degrees. The reason I'm involved in the MEM degree is actually because of my time in industry. So when I was in industry, I hired a number of engineering graduates from a number of schools, but also from a school where I had just been teaching. And I knew that these graduates were excellent, really smart, and very good engineers. But it turned out that for the company, they weren't very valuable for probably the first year or so. And that was very surprising to me and very frustrating for my managers. So we began to think about why it was that the fresh graduates were not very valuable to the company, even though they'd just done a great engineering degree. And what we found was that they were not oriented towards what the company needed. They were oriented towards solving problems, and they could solve lots of engineering problems, but they weren't oriented towards solutions, meaning how do you take care of a customer, basically? How do you develop a new product? How do you make a company profitable or add value to a company? So we realized that a lot of the courses that they had taken were great book learning courses and great engineering problem solving courses, but not very good for how do you add value, how do you make a company profitable. So the way that we then started thinking about education was a little bit different, and we decided, and this was happening actually all around the country, I'd say all around the world to some extent, people were starting to see this same thing. And what we decided was that at that time we needed to add things to the curriculum that related to how do you solve a customer's problem? How do you understand the business constraints around a technical problem? All the things that what we now call are part of the top of the T-shaped engineer, right? The T-shaped engineer now has strong expertise in an area, but also at the top of the T has the breadth to implement that expertise in the company. So more specifically, the way they add profit or value to a company is they take less training time, which means that you don't have your managers wasting time training your internal folks as much as solving problems for a customer. They understand how to solve problems for a customer more than just how to do a technical problem. And in addition to that, they actually understand how to define the problem. It turns out that defining the problem in a company is as important as solving the problem. And when I say defining the problem, that means understanding what the root cause of an issue is that's creating an issue for a customer, an internal or an external customer, and how do you solve or how do you define the problem such that the company can solve it. So I think those key issues of understanding the business climate, not taking as much training time from the company, understanding how to solve a customer's problem instead of just a technical problem, all add an amazing amount of value compared to just having the engineering degree. You know, if it were up to me, we would teach everything that we teach in the MEM in an undergraduate curriculum. We would say even our undergraduates need this, because they do, right? Unfortunately, the undergraduate curriculum is so packed with engineering courses that there's really almost no way to include that in the undergraduate curriculum. So the next best solution is a master's degree. It's an interesting question because I'm going to broaden it a little bit. You said, how does it help them when setting up a business venture? And that's an easy question. It's obviously strong help when you have to understand how do you write a business plan, how do you find money to fund your business, and how do you decide the best idea. And all those are important things when you're trying to set up your own business. But I think what's a little bit more interesting, and the reason I'm going to broaden the question a little bit is, why is it valuable to someone who doesn't start their own business? Because most of our students, let's face it, our students are pretty young, right? They're in the early stages of their career, and so the chance of them actually starting a successful company are fairly small. Of course, you studied entrepreneurship. The chances of any entrepreneurial venture being successful is very small. And when you're early in your career, the chances are even a little bit more difficult. So we have to think about that course not just in the context of a successful new venture, but why would a company hire you if you've taken that course? Why would a company care? Well, when I was in industry hiring people, I loved when they had an entrepreneurship course in their background. And then I found, actually before I came to Duke, I was at Case Western in the same kind of program, started that program, and we found that the companies who were all the advisors loved when students took that entrepreneurship course. So I realized or learned over the years that companies want you to understand the complete business. You aren't going to do every part of the business, but if you understand all the business, then you're much more effective in the company. So what Engineering Entrepreneurship will do is it'll tell you all aspects of the business. You'll get an understanding and a intuitive feel for everything from how does somebody decide on the market, to how does somebody decide on the technical solution, to how does somebody segment to the right customer that wants the early stage of this technology, and you do them all in one course. So it's really hard, and it's a rather rapid view of it, but it still allows a company to know that you've studied every single part of the business. So that's why I think engineering entrepreneurship is good for both someone who wants to start their new venture and somebody who wants to work for a big company. Now, every now and then a big company will say, what about this student who, graduate who we're going to hire, and then they're going to go away and start their own company. And I've only heard that a couple times in the many years that I've taught. And whenever I hear that, I explain to them, well, within 5 years, statistically, they're going to leave your company, or you're going to say it's time for you to go on to a different role or a different company. So the fact that a student might want to start their own business is actually a benefit for you, because they have this drive and this dynamicism and this innovative mindset that you want to bring into the company. So then the company understands that even entrepreneurs can be intrapreneurs, right? They can do the same types of things that they'll do in a startup actually in the big company and bring that innovative mindset to the big company. So kind of summarizing the three things that are really important: it teaches you all aspects of starting your own company, so it's good if you actually do that, but it teaches you all aspects of a business, so it can help you in even a big company, and it gives you the entrepreneurial and therefore intrapreneurial, innovative mindset to help a big company do new innovations and be more aggressive and innovative in the marketplace. So technology and understanding technical issues and engineering is your entry card, right? You can't get in without that. You have to have that in order to, have kind of the baseline of what's needed. And now I say that if you're coming to this from this perspective of engineering. Obviously, business people can go into startups and run the startups from a business perspective without a technical background, although it's very difficult in the early stages. So most of the people, even the professors we've talked about who've been successful entrepreneurs, those are all technical people who then have moved into the business side. You don't have business people moving into the technical side, obviously, because it's such a difficult thing to learn. So I think the way I look at it is, as a technical person, as an engineer or a scientist who's starting a company or being involved in startup companies, that technology and science is your entry. And once you're in, though, you have to really understand the difference between a technical solution and a business solution. And mostly that means you have to talk to the customers. You have to understand what the customers need more than what the technology does underneath. You have to understand how the technology provides value to them, but many times you'll find in startups they're operating at the cutting edge of technology, so they don't really understand how the technology or science works. They just know that it works. And then in the schools, in academic labs and research labs, we try to figure out, well, why is this working and how does it work, so that we can go the next stage. But in the startups, they're just saying, okay, it works. How do we apply it to a customer, and how do we make money on it? And so I think that technology background really helps you get involved in the beginning. But if you don't quickly shift your mindset to how does the technology create profit and create a solution for a customer, then you won't be successful. I must compliment you on your questions. These questions are very interesting. Stepping out of your comfort zone is hard, right? So why do it if you don't think it's a good idea? The best way to express it is what I hear from our alums and our industry representatives who've had long, healthy careers and are now upper-level managers. Most of the time, they will say they had no way of knowing where they would end up. It was something fortuitous, some opportunity that presented itself that they would have never predicted, right? So even though we would like to predict our career, and even though we'd like to say our career is going to follow this specific path, in reality that doesn't happen. So the most important thing about stepping out of your comfort zone is that if you don't, you're going to miss opportunities that present themselves along the way, and those are going to be the most interesting opportunities. One of our very senior alumni from Duke talked about his career, and he managed a multi-billion-dollar company. And he said that one of the key issues in his career is he didn't want to live outside the U.S. He just didn't like traveling internationally. And so he said that to his bosses, I'm not going to travel internationally, I'm happy to stay in the U.S. and work very hard. And something happened where one of their employees had to leave an international assignment, and they said, you're the only person who can go do this assignment. And reluctantly he said, okay, I'll go to this assignment, but I don't really want to. It was in Germany. And he got to Germany with his wife and stayed there for a year and loved it so much that he wanted to spend the rest of his career in Germany and in Europe. What's interesting is they wanted him to take over a directorship in the company and join the board, and they couldn't do that if he was in Europe. He had to come back to the US. So here he was with a large fraction of his career in a location and doing jobs that he didn't want to do when he graduated. Now, I will say the exact same thing about myself. When I graduated, I had two goals. I didn't want to travel, and I didn't want to speak in public. Isn't that odd for a professor who, I didn't know I wanted to be a professor at the time, right? So my first jobs, I said, well, I don't think I really want to take a job where I have to travel. But the most interesting job came up from a Japanese company. I was working for the subsidiary of the Japanese company, and of course if you join a Japanese company you got to expect you're going to have to travel to Japan. But it was such an interesting job and it was so unique, and I knew that even though it was actually less money than I'd been offered from another large US company, DuPont in fact, I decided to take this very weird, unique job, even though I had to travel. And after a year or so, I loved to travel. I enjoyed going to Japan and going to Asia and many locations there throughout Asia. And so I found that, again, I stepped out of my comfort zone and found that was really where I belonged. So if you don't step out of your comfort zone, you won't know the things that you're missing, and you won't realize opportunities that you would never see if you just stayed where you're comfortable and sort of where you're, maybe you know that you can do a good job. You got to take some risk. I like to think that career decisions, the big career decisions you make are not the important ones, in my opinion. The most important decisions you make are the decisions you make every single day. When you go into work, what are you going to work on? Who are you going to associate with? What colleagues are you going to talk to? What network are you going to build? What assignments are you going to take on? Those are the most important decisions. One at a time, every single day. How are you going to balance your life? How hard are you going to work? How hard are you going to play? What are those decisions that you make are really critical. We obviously can't go through all those decisions that I make every day, but I would encourage you to think about those decisions as being really important, even though they're a lot easier to make every day because you don't see the impact quite as much. So let's talk about the big decisions I've made. Big decisions are the kinds that you make charts up about, right? You say, what are the pros and cons of this decision? What are the risks of this decision versus the opportunities? And I think there are two that I made in my life that are really at the top. The first was fresh out of school, when I finished my PhD, and I mentioned it actually in your other question. I joined a Japanese company. And joining that Japanese company, everybody thought I was a little bit odd at the time. There were lots of other opportunities, and I had a couple of other offers from large US companies that were more traditional. And you know how you get social pressure that says you should take this kind of job and you should make this much money and you should live in this kind of a house, etc. That's the kind of pressure you'll get when you take maybe the job that's not the obvious one, the one that your peers don't understand. And I think for me, it was exactly the right decision. I took the job where I even got a little bit of, how should I say, teasing and even some negativity from my peers, because at the time Japan was the rising star in terms of economics, and the US had a down economy, so people were really questioning whether I should do that. And what I found was it was the best decision I could have made at that time, because I got the most unique experience and I learned the most. So when I look at jobs and careers early on especially, you don't want to consider money, even though we have to some extent. You want to consider, how much am I going to learn, how much responsibility will I have, and what are my opportunities. And by taking a job that was very unique, that wasn't very well defined, I was able to get a lot of opportunity, a lot more responsibility, and within a couple of years I was making as much money as I would have at a more traditional job. But it took a couple of years. At first it was the pay was a lot less. So that was decision number one. That's top. My second best decision was, of course, coming to Duke. And I'm not saying that because I'm at Duke and we're interviewing here at Duke at all. Duke is the only university I've ever been at where I think I could retire from, meaning I could be here the rest of my career. I've never thought that about another job. Gosh, I apologize to the other universities I've been at, but let's look at it in its perspective, is that I was at a different stage in my career, but I always looked at them as kind of projects where I knew I wanted to go and accomplish a certain thing at the universities, not that it was such a family-oriented kind of environment where you feel comfortable that, gosh, I could stay here and do new things here for the rest of my career. And I think Duke, really a very unique and unexpected environment here at Duke is this environment where we work across boundaries in every way. We work with the business school, the law school, we work with downtown Durham, we work with the provost's office, and I hadn't experienced that before. The whole ecosystem here is very supportive of crossing boundaries and doing new things. And I love to do new things. I love to start new things, and I love to take them to a successful level, and then other people are maybe better at operations and actually keeping them going. But for me, the excitement of making sure they're sustainable and successful in their early stages is really fun. And Duke's good at that. It's an entrepreneurial environment, and that's not very common in universities. So that was my second best decision in my career.